Hello everyone, Rich Hagan sitting alongside one of our limited resources, Mr. Marshall Sutcliffe. It's time to know our enemies. I can tell you in the flow of the Pro Tour, all the matches are in, so we're already heading towards pairings. We will not be long before round 2 is back with BDM and Ian Duke. But Marshall, we're here to talk about the enemy color pairs in the draft archetypes, and in particular to get a sense of what people have been doing on Magic Online drafting. So why don't we go into our first set. Queued up and ready for us are the White-Black Warriors.
Yeah, so White-Black Warriors is actually the best two-color pair out of the whole entire set, so it's a good place to start. As you can see, it can be aggressive. It can also sit back a little bit as well, and it gains some really nice new cards. Harsh Sustenance, Battle Brawler, Harsh Sustenance being really one of the premier cards.
Yeah, it's a lovely thing. Why don't we look at the commons then that are being picked highly. If you look at the bottom there, we won't reiterate this too often, but these are the most frequently picked 1st through 5th commons among your winners on Magic Online. So it's early picks, it's not just first picks, because obviously you pick lovely mythics and rares if you get a good chance, but these are 1 to 5. And what stands out there?
Sandstep Outcast, probably the best white common in the whole set. It fits perfectly in this list, and you can see, if you look at the rest of the 5, they're all removal. So we're talking about a creature that is stacked up against really good removal spells and still comes out ahead.
And I was going to say that hasn't always been true, where you just go removal, 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 removal. It's interesting that they're available and highly...
If they're going to give us the tools, we'll take them.
But we haven't always had the tools.
No.
Why don't we look at the top FRF uncommons for the Warrior deck?
Yeah, so you see Valorous Stance. This is a card that Luis Scott Vargas first picked at this very tournament, and you can see why. It's a supremely flexible card. Elite Scale Guard, we're calling it the Mythic Uncommon of the set in our draft group. And I mean, that has rare quality stats, and Orc Sure Shot can be an absolute engine. You'll also see Battle Brawler on the list, which we saw in the initial graphic too. Okay,
so that's the Fate Reforged, but what about Khans of Tarkir? How does that impact on what's gone on here? Why don't we look at the combined look? So there we go, top commons and uncommons from Khans of Tarkir.
Right, so we saw in Khans of Tarkir that it was a warrior sub-theme in these two colors, primarily based off the Chief of the Edge and Chief of the Scale, the two creatures at uncommon that really pushed the strategy, but it also lined up really nicely with cards like Raiders, Spoils, and a few other cards that were warrior-centric. And I think that the new cards that we get just add to that.
Okay, let's go on to our second archetype. We're going to keep the white and we're going to add red. It's red-white tokens.
Right, and red-white tokens is sort of the shell of a deck that we had before, and it gets some great new toys front and center. Sandstep Outcast again. I think it's the best white common in the whole set, and we get an even better and even more powerful mass pump spell with War Flare.
Okay, so let's take a look at the commons that are being picked, and there is indeed Sandstep Outcast and Goblin Heel Cutter. That's an interesting card.
Yeah, Goblin Heel Cutter I think is the best red common. It's either that or Bathe in Dragonfire, both of them on the list. And Goblin Heel Cutter is the kind of card that if you aren't aware of it, you will become supremely punished. If you are aware of it, you can play in such a way that mitigates it somewhat. But the card comes out of nowhere, it adds an attacker with haste to the board and removes one of your blockers effectively for the turn. It can be a great finisher.
All right, on to the uncommons then for red-white tokens. And there we are, the lovely
How do you
Pyrotechnics.
like this? Yeah, so we've got Pyrotechnics, maybe the best uncommon in the set, sitting right next to the other maybe best mythic uncommon of the set, Elite Scale Guard. I mean, Lightform, Wandering Champion, Wild Slasher, all fine cards, but those first two are absolute standout first picks.
So why don't we look then at Khans of Tarkir, the commons and uncommons in red-white tokens, see if anything's shifted about there?
Yeah, not a whole lot. Again, I think War Flare being added to the mix is really kind of the one that stands out because it works well with so many of the cards you see here.
All right, so on we go, and archetype number 3, it's going to be black and green. And this time, well, black and green, they kind of have a theme of toughness really mattering.
Yeah, so basically black-green is the slowdown color pair in this set. It's looking to put out a bunch of low-power, high-toughness creatures for relatively cheap and slow the game down to a grinding halt.
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely even. Let's go on to the commons then that are being picked highly, remember, on Magic Online right now.
So again, we were talking about the removal in Fate Reforged. If you look, removal, 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 Whisper of the Wilds, removal. Everything here speaks to removal. Grim Contest is the one that stands out to me in this particular archetype because it's a type of removal we haven't seen before, and it works really well with these Archer's Parapet, these big walls and the high toughness creatures that we have in this particular color pair.
Okay, Fate Reforged uncommons coming right up then in black-green. And there we see Merciless Executioner, which we've seen before in other places. Now, Teema Sabertooth, that turns out to be a really interesting card in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's interesting in the sense that you play it and then you win the game. Because it's almost impossible to kill, and it has a lot of really cool synergies. Maybe you have a Manifest face down, it's one of your best spells, you can pick it up, play it, you can protect your Sabertooth, it attacks well, it blocks well. I think it goes in that Mythic Uncommon list as well. Abzan Beastmaster, the one you see after that, is particularly good too in this archetype because it sits there. It's a respectable 2/1 for 3, not good, but respectable, and it starts drawing you extra cards, and it must be dealt with. Your opponent simply cannot ignore it. They have to use some form of removal on it, and that isn't the type of card that they want to use removal on. They want to use it on your, air quotes, real creatures.
Yeah, although things like Dousing Gloom, you always feel a little happier when you've used a douse on something like that. But
Absolutely.
It's when you reach of shadows that you're like, oh, Lord, really?
Yes.
All right, why don't we look at Khans of Tarkir then, both the commons and uncommons, in the black-green Toughness Matters lineup.
Right, so taking a look back at these, nothing much has changed here for the deck. It just got a bunch of new toys to play with, but the same kind of stuff that we saw, Kintry Invocations, Willy Loxodons, you know, your Death Touch creatures, your Dead Drops, they're all still good.
So, we've had 3 archetypes in color pairs. We are going to have blue-red up next, and I can tell you here that spells matter.
Yeah, so spells matter in blue-red, and this is an archetype that didn't really exist before. We had Jeskai, which spells matter, but this one is pushing it in a different direction. We saw Luis Scott Vargas do this actually at the GP, and this deck is capable of almost a combo-like finish. You can set up scenarios where you just need to attack once or twice throughout the course of the game to win it.
Right. Interesting stuff. Let's look at the commons then. Coming out of Fate Reforged, these are the 1st to 5th picked on Magic Online. So you've got your Bathing Dragonfire. You've got then Goblin Heel Cutter, but there's Lotus Path Djinn and Calm Yourself, Marshall.
Yeah.
Aven Surveyor.
Hold me back, Rich. So Aven Surveyor, it's my favorite card in the set, and it's borne out to be an excellent card as well. You won't often put the +1/+1 counter on it. You usually know when it's correct to do that, but the other times you're putting out an evasive 2/2 flyer and bouncing one of their creatures that punishes all types of things like auras, expensive spells, delve cards, and you can get way ahead. Lotus Path Djinn, very solid. You know, I don't think there's anything super exciting about the card. Rock solid though.
Yeah, it's interesting because for people who've been playing a while, they look at a 2/3 for 4 and think, okay, yeah, I mean it flies, so it's better than the 2/2 for 4, which used to be around back in the day, but the prowess really does make a big difference.
It absolutely does.
Sure.
It pushes it over the top.
Do you have a sense of like how much of a boost prowess is when you think of its fundamental stats? Do you think of it as primarily a 2/3, or do you think of it as primarily a 3/4 brackets, occasionally 4/5?
No, I think of it the other way. So I think of it as primarily a 2/3, sometimes a 3/4. Generally speaking, in limited, you're going to have around 8 non-creature spells in your deck total, maybe fewer. And what that means is that you're not often going to be able to trigger it literally every turn.
Although that has gone up with Manifest. Manifest is so
Absolutely.
great for prowess.
Absolutely. Also, there are a lot of cards in this set that allow you to do what you said, which is build out your board, your actual board state with creatures that aren't actually creatures, but also cards that have a minimal effect, trigger prowess, and draw you a card to keep that chain flowing.
Okay, let's look at the uncommons then from Fate Reforged that are being drafted highly by you, the viewers at home. Here we are, Pyrotechnics again. Wild Slash, there's Cloud Form. Do you have a sense of Cloud Form versus Light Form? Do you have a favorite of those two?
I do. I prefer Light Form myself. I think it gives you a more solid base to start with, but I would take either one and play either one. They're both absolutely excellent. The card that I'm surprised to see on the list is Frostwalker.
Now this is the 4/1 Mr. Fragile, right?
Mr. Fragile, yeah, he's only 2 mana. You get 4 power, enables Ferocious and things like that, and just hits really hard if undealt with, but if you look at it, it just falls apart. It melts like a snowman.
Breathe at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised to see that. I'm curious to see if it sticks on that list as we go
Yeah,
deeper.
this is no Olaf. Why don't we go on then to the Khans of Tarkir impact on this draft archetype. So there's your top commons and uncommons in blue-red.
Yeah, the card that we have the picture up there is Jeskai Windscout. It seems to be still one of the most important cards here. for this. And another card that I think we've had our eye on now is Whirlwind Adept. It's a card that Luis Scott Vargas used at the GP that I mentioned earlier with this archetype. He was just blue-red, and he used a card like Temur Battle Rage even to get in for a ton of extra damage. And he used, Misfire Adept to give flying as well. So, there's some, like I said, there's some sort of, it almost feels like a combo finish where your opponent thinks that they're safe. Now they're taking 14 in the air.
Yeah, 14's quite a lot. So that leaves us, we've done white-black, we've done red-white, we've done black-green, we've done blue-red. It must be time for green-blue. Brian David Marshall's rubbing his hands, the
sure
Simic
is.
master. So why don't we take a look at the overall shape of green-blue? And in a lot of ways, the cards here are not green and blue. They're face down. They're morphs and manifests.
Yeah, and that really is the key to this whole archetype is you get the big green creatures, you get the blue tempo spells, but you get to fill everything in with these manifests and morphs.
Okay, so great news, boys and girls. I can tell you that it is just about time. That was the world of knowing your enemies.